继续授看佛学英文这一堂课。You are most welcome to return to the class of Buddhist English. Today we want to continue the story of the lady Visakha, who tried her best to support the Buddha. Let's read a few sentences and we will complete the story of Visakha. And then, if we still have time, we will go to tell you the story of another benefactor of the Buddha. Right now, let's read the sentences. Repeat after me. When Visakha heard what had happened, she decided to give a grand gift to the older. She thought first to give the jewels, then decided to sell them and use the money for things more suited to the use of the monks. She then found that no one could afford such precious jewelry, so she decided to buy it herself and use the money for the monks. The Buddha, pleased with her generosity, suggested that she build a monastery, which she did. The Buddha stayed there with his disciples for 6 rainy seasons. Rather than chastising her servant, Visakha was appreciative for the occasion to perform this meritorious deed. The Buddha's greatest supporter was Anantapindika, a wealthy businessman from Savatthi. When Anantapindika first heard of the Buddha, a fully enlightened teacher in the world, his desire to meet was very strong. Rather than wait until the next day to visit, he traveled that night through the jungle, alone in total darkness, to the place where the Buddha was staying, and met him just before dawn. Upon receiving instruction from the Buddha, his inspiration was so great that he invited the Buddha to stay with him for the rains, along with the entire community of the monks. The Buddha accepted, and Anantapindika set about finding a suitable place to build a monastery. He finally came upon the pleasure park of Jeta, the prince of Savatthi. Now the park was a wonderful place, serene and peaceful, and fulfilling all the requirements. A place such as this, Prince Jeta was reluctant to lose, so he told Anantapindika the price should be determined by covering the entire grounds with gold coins, thinking this would deter him. Repeat again. When Visakha heard what had happened, she decided to give a grand gift to the older. She thought just first to give the jewels, then decided to sell them and use the money for things more suitable to the use of monks. She then found that no one could afford such precious jewelry, so she decided to buy it herself and use the money for the monks. The Buddha, pleased with her generosity, suggested she build a monastery, which she did. The Buddha stayed there with his disciples for 6 rainy seasons. Rather than chastising her servant, Visakha was appreciative for the occasion to perform this meritorious deed. The Buddha's greatest supporter was Anantapindika, a wealthy businessman from Savatthi. When Anantapindika first heard of the Buddha, a fully enlightened teacher in the world, his desire to meet was very strong. Rather than wait until the next day to visit, he traveled that night through the jungle, alone in total darkness, to the place where the Buddha was staying, and met him just before dawn. Upon receiving instruction from the Buddha, his inspiration was so great that he invited the Buddha to stay with him for the rains, along with the entire community of the monks. The Buddha accepted, and Anantapindika set about finding a suitable place to build a monastery. He finally came upon the pleasure park of Jeta, the prince of Savatthi. Now, this park was a wonderful place, serene and peaceful, and fulfilling all the requirements. A place such as this Prince Jeta was reluctant to lose, so she told Anantapindika the price should be determined by covering the entire grounds with gold coins, thinking this would deter him. After reading these few sentences, we may get an image that there are 2 supporters of the Buddha. They are doing their best to support the Buddha and his Sangha order. Generosity or charity is the most important practice of Dharma, because through giving generosity, donation, we can get rid of the sense of ego. We can open our heart and open our mind to accept the whole world. Who is Visakha? Visakha was a lady at the Buddha's time. She was the greatest benefactress of the Buddha. She supported the Buddha to the utmost. Among the lady supporters of the Buddha, Visakha was the one who donated the most to the Buddha. Of course, Visakha should be rich, but the most important thing is the piety, devotion, and the enthusiasm she showed to the Buddha. When Visakha learned that the Buddha was close to the place she lived, she decided to see the Buddha and receive the instruction from the Buddha. So she went to see the Buddha, and the Buddha gave her the instruction, taught her what is the truth of our universe and our life, and what is the way to practice Dharma. After receiving the instruction from the Buddha, Visakha started to go home. She asked her servant to pack all the valuable things. However, the servant forgot and left the package of the precious things in the place where the monks stayed. Buddha had a very devoted disciple and servant. His name is called Ananda. Ananda found the package and waited there to return the package to the pious lady Visakha. When Visakha heard what had happened, she decided to use the opportunity to give a grand gift to the older. The story goes like this way. Visakha asked the servant to protect the valuable things, but the servant forgot to bring the valuable things with her. She left the valuable things package at the place where the monks stayed. And Ananda found the package and put it in a safe place for return to Visakha. When Visakha heard about the story and understood the entire story, she was much moved. Then she decided to give a grand gift to the older. Visakha was impressed with Ananda. As a monk, Ananda was reluctant to take whatever was not given. A monk didn't need any luxury things. So Ananda placed the precious things in a safe place for return to Visakha. Visakha understood the story and decided that it was a golden opportunity for her to donate to the monks. To give a grand gift means to donate a large sum of money. Grand means great. Give means present or donation. To the older means to the Sangha older. Older means a group of people. Here, older refers to the monk, the Sangha. The Sangha older. Visakha was so happy to use this golden opportunity to donate a great sum of money to the monks. She thought first to give the jewels, then decided to sell them and use the money for things more suited to the use of monks. Visakha thought about what is the best way to donate to the monk. First, she thought to give the jewels to the monks because, in fact, her jewels were lost already. It was only because of Ananda, who found the package and put the package in a safe place for return to Visakha. Visakha thought that her jewels actually were already lost. So she decided to give the jewels to the monks. However, after reflection, she found that the monks didn't need the jewels. The monks are practitioners of Buddha Dharma. The monks lived a very simple life. The monks didn't need any jewels. Therefore, for the second thought, Visakha decided to sell the jewels and use the money for things more suited to the monks. The first thought was to give the jewels to the monks, but the second thought was to sell the jewels and to buy things more suited to the use of the monks. Because the monks didn't need any jewels. It is of no use to give the jewels to the monks. Visakha decided to sell the jewels and use the money to buy things more suited to the use of the monks. The monks might use the money to buy food or simple clothes or to build a simple cottage. So Visakha decided the better way. She then found that no one could afford such precious jewelry. So she decided to buy it herself and use the money for the monks. The second thought of Visakha was to sell the jewels and use the money to buy things more suited to the use of the monks. She decided to sell the jewels, but in a very short time, she found that no one could afford the jewelry. No one could be able to buy the jewelry. The jewelry was so precious. Nobody else was so rich as Visakha. Nobody had the ability to buy the jewelry. Nobody could buy the jewelry. Therefore, Visakha would have no money to donate to the monks. However, Visakha decided to buy the jewels herself. So she bought the jewelry. She bought the jewels herself and used the money for the monks. The Buddha, pleased with her generosity, suggested she build a monastery, which she did. The Buddha stayed there with his disciples for 6 reigning seasons. Nobody could buy the jewels. Visakha bought the jewels herself. Then she began to think how to use the money for the benefit of the monks. The Buddha was so happy with her generosity. The Buddha was very glad to understand that Visakha was so generous. The Buddha was moved by Visakha. Therefore, the Buddha gave an advice to the generous lady Visakha. He asked her to build a monastery for the monks. A monastery is the place where the monks can stay and practice. Visakha followed the instruction of the Buddha. She built a monastery and donated the monastery to the Buddha. The Buddha was so happy with Visakha's generosity. After receiving the donation of the monastery, Visakha built with the money she bought her jewels herself. The Buddha stayed there with his disciples for 6 reigning seasons. After the monastery was built, the Buddha stayed there for 6 reigning seasons. in India, there are rainy season and dry season. It is very hot in India. There is no winter. The whole year can be divided into rainy season and dry season. During the rainy season, the Buddha and his disciples had to stay in the monastery and work very hard in meditation. Visakha built the monastery and donated the monastery to the Buddha. The Buddha and his disciples stayed at the monastery for 6 rainy seasons. That means the Buddha and his disciples stayed there for 6 years, because 1 year has only 1 rainy season. 1 rainy season usually lasts for 3 months. During the rainy season, the rain is very heavy. It is not suitable for people to go outside. Especially, it is not suitable for the monks to go outside for begging foods. The Buddha stayed there for 6 years. Rather than chastising her servant, Visakha was appreciative for the occasion to perform this meritorious deed. Rather than means not, but do another action. Visakha did not reprimand her servant. Visakha was a practitioner of Dhamma and a follower of the Buddha. She did not chastise, reprimand her servant. On the other hand, Visakha used the opportunity to do the generosity. She was not an ordinary woman. She's different from other women. If we do something, usually we would become very sad or angry. If our servant does the wrong things, we would reprimand them. But Visakha was in a different way. Visakha was appreciative of the opportunity. She enjoyed the opportunity to do the meritorious deed. Meritorious deeds means the deeds have the merits, meaning, and value. Rather than chastising her servant, Visakha was appreciative Appreciative means she appreciated the occasion to perform the meritorious deed. She was the greatest benefactress of the Buddha. She helped the most among the women. She donated the most to the Sangha order. This is the story of Visakha, how she practiced Dharma in ordinary days. She was not angry. She was happy with everything, even she lost the money. She didn't say anything bad to the servant. Now, let's discuss about the story of another benefactor of the Buddha. His name was Arantapindika. The Buddha's greatest supporter was Arantapindika, a wealthy businessman from Savatthi. The Buddha had many supporters, but among the supporters, the greatest one was Arantapindika, including men and women supporters. Arantapindika was the greatest one. Arantapindika was a wealthy businessman from Savatthi. Savatthi is a kingdom where the Buddha always stayed there. Arantapindika ran the business very successfully. He made a great fortune, and he had a very generous and compassionate mind. He donated the most to the Buddha. When Arantapindika first heard of the Buddha, a fully enlightened teacher in the world, his desire to meet him was very strong. Aranta was the disciple of the Buddha. Arantapindika was the greatest supporter of the Buddha. For the very first time, when Arantapindika heard of the Buddha, a fully enlightened man in the world, somebody mentioned about the Buddha. Some people discuss about the Buddha's wisdom and compassion. Buddha was a fully enlightened teacher in the whole world. After Arantapindika learned who was the Buddha, he decided to see him. His desire to meet the Buddha was very strong. Buddha was such a great person, fully enlightened teacher in the world. Arantapindika had the strong desire, the strong wish to meet the Buddha. Rather than wait until the next day to visit, he traveled that night through the jungle, alone in total darkness, to the place where the Buddha was staying, and met him just before dawn. Anathapindika was a successful businessman and also a very pious man. When he heard about the story of the Buddha, he didn't wait until the next day. We ordinary people would wait until the next morning because it was not safe and convenient to travel in darkness, especially in ancient times. There was no car, no electricity, no paved road. It was very inconvenient and uncomfortable to travel in darkness. But Anathapindika ignored the bad conditions. He traveled immediately that night through the jungle. Jungle is a wild forest, no road, no safe place. One has to go through the jungle in a difficult situation, alone in the total darkness. He decided to see the Buddha that night. He went through the jungle by himself only. Nobody accompanied him. It was so dark in the evening. Anathapindika was totally alone. He traveled in the darkness to the place where the Buddha was staying, and I met the Buddha before dawn. Dawn was the early morning when the twilight just shines into the earth. Anathapindika traveled through the jungle alone in total darkness and arrived at the place where the Buddha lived. Anathapindika was so pious to see the Buddha just before dawn. Upon receiving instruction from the Buddha, his inspiration was so great that he invited the Buddha to stay with him for the rains, along with the entire community of monks. Anathapindika went to see the Buddha. The Buddha gave instructions to Anathapindika. So Anathapindika was so happy. He invited the Buddha and the whole community of Sangha to stay at his place for the rains. He invited the Buddha and the entire community, entire order of the Sangha, and went to stay with him for the rains. The rains refers to the raining season. Anathapindika wanted to show his generosity to the Buddha and monks. So he invited the Buddha and the whole Sangha order to stay with him during the raining season. The Buddha accepted, and Anathapindika set about finding a suitable place to build a monastery. The Buddha accepted the invitation from Anathapindika to stay with him for the raining season with all his Sangha followers. Then Anathapindika set about finding a suitable place to build a monastery. The Buddha had many disciples. Therefore, it needed a big house to accommodate the entire Sangha order. Anathapindika started to find a place suitable to the building of temples. He finally came upon the precious garden of Jeta, the prince of Savatthi. Anathapindika started to find the place suitable for a monastery. He tried to locate where is the better place to build the monastery. Finally, he came across the precious park of Jeta. Jeta was the prince of Savatthi. If Anathapindika wanted to accommodate the whole Sangha order, he needed a big place to build the monastery. However, he only discovered the garden of Jeta was the most suitable place to build a monastery. Now this park was a wonderful place, serene and peaceful and fulfilling all the requirements. Anathapindika came across the precious park of Jeta. And at that time, the precious park of Jeta was a wonderful place, a very good place, serene and peaceful. Serene means quiet. The atmosphere was so quiet and peaceful and fulfilling all the requirements. Whatever were needed, this precious park could afford to present it. A place such as this Prince Jeta was reluctant to lost, so he told Ananta the price would be determined by covering the entire grounds with gold coins, thinking this would deter him. The pressure park was so beautiful and nice to build a monastery. A place such as this, a place so beautiful, of course, Prince Arantapindika would not sell the land, the park. He decided to discourage Arantapindika because the land was so big and precious. The land was so serene and beautiful. He told Ananta, if he told Arantapindika, if the latter wanted to buy the precious garden, the precious park, the price would be determined by covering the entire grounds with gold coins. The Prince Jeta was reluctant to sell the precious park, but it was not easy for him to open mouth to say no to Arantapindika. So he decided to discourage Arantapindika to buy his precious park. So he said, if you want to buy this precious park, you should cover the grounds with gold coins. Otherwise, I would not sell the land to you. Prince Jeta thought that this price would deter Arantapindika. Therefore, the prince could have the precious park to enjoy the life. He thought that this price would deter him not to go ahead. When Arantapindika started holding the gold in cups, Jeta realized this was no ordinary purchase, and when the gold left a small spot uncovered, he gave that as his gift to the order of monks. Prince Jeta would like to discourage Arantapindika to buy the precious park. However, Arantapindika determined to buy the precious park and to build a monastery for the Buddha. He was so pious and sincere and enthusiastic. So he started holding the gold in cups. After seeing what Arantapindika was doing, Prince Jeta realized this was no ordinary purchase. And when the gold left a small spot uncovered, he gave that as his gift to the order of monks. Arantapindika started to cover the grounds with gold coins. he was a rich businessman, so he had lots of golden coins. Finally, there was only a small spot left uncovered with golden coins. So Prince Jeta gave that small spot as his donation to the order of monks. The monastery was constructed, and here the Buddha spent the greater part of his life giving many discourses. Aranta Pindika and Prince Jeta donated the land and built the monastery. After the construction was finished, the Buddha and his disciples stayed there for the greater part of his life, giving instruction to the people. Thank you for joining us. Thank you again.